I do kind of regret calling it an uncomfortable place after following those two talks that were kind of a lot more serious. And I'm talking about web components, which is like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of fortuitous timing for me, really, because the past year or so, web components have been my entire world. And I hadn't really come into contact with them before that. So yeah, when I saw that that was sort of a hot topic that Remy wanted to see, I was like, might have something on this. So yeah, so an uncomfortable place. Can we keep everyone happy with web components? I mean, it's a big ask, really, isn't it? Spot the difference. It's three buttons. I mean, I don't know, the lighting might throw you off a little bit here, but yeah, spot the difference. We will come back to this. So a bit of background, first of all. I am a UI engineer in a design system team at a company called Intap. They are a US company. I do not live in the US. I live near Manchester, so most of my team are in the US, and I, very luckily for me, get my mornings entirely free of meetings until everybody wakes up at about 2 p.m. So it works quite nicely. Intap is, they provide a lot of software for a lot of different companies in a lot of different industries. So like accountancy firms, real estate, law firms, they do a lot of things. They have a lot of different products. And as a result, they have a lot of acquired products as well. So I think within the last 6 months, there are 2 new products that we've taken on board. So there's kind of a lot going on. And as a result of this, we have a lot of different tech stacks knocking around as well. And that means there's a lot of different front-end frameworks. There's no kind of consistency. It's not like everything's written in React and we've got an easy starting point. There's just a lot going on. And a lot of that is down to the fact that we do have a lot of different acquired products. So that also kind of means there's a lot of opinions. The products we've had for the longest time, they are very strongly of the opinion that everybody should switch over to React because that's what they're using, and they're kind of, the biggest one in our whole repertoire of different products, and so they should have to say that everyone should switch over to React. We also have then a lot of rebranding priorities as well. So we've got all of these new things coming in. They don't really look consistent with what we've got with everything else. And we need to do something relatively quickly so that we can get those to our customers who aren't just going to turn around and say, well, wait a second, what is this? This is not an Intap product. It looks completely different. So there's all these different things kind of going on. So that brings me to the first challenge, really. The design system team didn't really exist probably more than 2 years ago within Intap. There had been one of those big product teams who tried to kind of do their own coded component library. And then within sort of the last 2 years, a decision was made that actually we need to kind of do this properly. We need a design system team to take on this problem, to be responsible for it outside of just an individual product situation. And so luckily, that role came up for a UI engineer when I was looking for a job, and I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to sit around and build components. I am, happy to do that. And we've been working together since then. But the biggest challenge when I started was put to me by my manager, who said, okay, well, we have all of these different front-end frameworks. Is there a way that we can provide coded component libraries for all of them, regardless of the framework that they're using? Is that possible? I want you to go and look at web components to see how we can do that. So we need to be able to provide for all of our teams. Maybe web components could be the answer. So I was set off to go and do the research into this, and just for kind of a bit of a disclaimer, my background at this point was as a front-end engineer, and I was a React developer. So I kind of came to this with being like, you know what, we should probably just use React, right? Like that kind of makes sense, because that was kind of the background that I'd come in from. I hadn't really looked into web components at all, hadn't really had need to, because everything I had worked on prior to that had been very much React focused. Didn't really pop up on my radar that web components could be in any way useful for what I was doing at that point. But in the spirit of curiosity and open-mindedness and wanting to do right by our teams as well, I did the research because, I enjoy my job and I hope I'm good at it. So don't like to let my own biases get in the way of that. Okay, so what are web components? They have been around for a long time. This is not kind of a new phenomenon. This is not something that's just popped up. However, they have been getting a lot more kind of traction recently. So if you're not aware, they're based on web platform APIs. They allow you to create custom, reusable, encapsulated HTML tags to use in web pages and web apps. So that means you can do things like create custom elements. So instead of just using the regular standard HTML tags like button, P, whatever, you can create your own, so my custom button. They also use the shadow DOM. This is where things get a little bit complicated, and to be honest, even though I've been doing this for over a year, it still confuses me half the time. The shadow DOM basically encapsulates elements in a shadow root, which means that you don't have the problem of styles leaking in and out, interfering with each other. So if you've got styles in your components, they should stay in your components. And if you've got styles on the regular page, they shouldn't then go and affect the components that you've built, in theory. It uses HTML templates as well. Basically what happens when you've got a custom element, a web component in a page, that's kind of a template that's just there that doesn't really do anything in the HTML document until you need it to be a component on a page. And the most important thing that's made kind of all of this possible is that it's based off of ES modules. And so that allows you to export and import those components across files. That's why it makes it possible to write things like my custom button and then import that into your HTML document. So that's kind of how the whole thing comes together. So what does all this mean? Well, basically, it means that we can get framework-agnostic components built using existing browser standards, which that's pretty great. That's kind of a win, right? That's what we would all want. We don't really have to care about frameworks anymore because we can do this. Fantastic. So problem solved, right? Great. I can just do that and leave, and that's it. Job done. No issues. Well, it's not really that simple, is it? So particularly pre-React 19, React doesn't play nice. It doesn't want to be taking web components. It just doesn't. It's not interested in them. There's a data flow mismatch. React doesn't know what to do with information that comes from a web component. It basically assumes that every attribute is a string, which, I mean, it's probably not a string. It could be an object. It could be anything else. But React's like, yep, that's a string. So it doesn't really do the things that you need it to do, the things that you intended that component to do. And it also doesn't listen. It's kind of rude, really. It's just like, no, it's not React. I am not interested. I am not listening to that. It doesn't listen to custom events. So any events that you've built into your component, React is like, none, I don't care. I'm not going to listen to that. And it struggles to identify state changes within custom elements as well. So it doesn't trigger re-renders like it should do. So if you built a regular React component, and when state changed, it would trigger a re-render, and you would see what you should see. If that happens with a custom element, with a web component, React doesn't pay any attention to it. It doesn't do the things it should do. So this is kind of a problem, right? So if you're not using React 19, which actually at the moment, the majority of the teams that we're working with, they're not, and a lot of them aren't even on React 18 yet. So this is kind of a big issue if we're trying to say, we're going to go forward and do this. So we need wrappers to make this work. So you don't need a library to build web components, but it does kind of make things a little bit easier. So there can be a lot of boilerplate code to write if you're writing a lot of components particularly, and libraries can help reduce that. They have their own syntax. They do a lot of the heavy lifting for you, so you don't have to keep writing all of that reusable code that could be done by a library. The shadow DOM isn't always desirable either. It can cause a lot of issues with accessibility. It's not always necessary. We found that quite often we actually don't need the shadow DOM for our components because of the way that we're building them. And so libraries, a lot of them have the ability to put controls in place where you can switch it off for certain components, which for the majority of ours, that's what we are doing. You can also get framework wrappers as well, which is the thing that we came to the conclusion that we needed. If we were going to be able to use web components within our different products, within those different frameworks, we needed wrappers. And it kind of would be a lot of work to be writing those web components, writing this framework-agnostic component that could be used anywhere, but then having to write the individual wrappers for each framework as well on top. That would be a lot to do. So there are a lot of libraries that actually kind of do that for you, so you don't have to worry about doing that bit. You get other helpful tools as well. So things like Lit and Stencil both have SSR support. If you're building actual applications out of these things, there are things like routing involved. So there's kind of a lot of add-ons that you can get. And there are various options available. I was looking into this recently. There are fewer actually now than there were probably even a year ago when I first started doing this research. But there are a few things out there. Lit is probably the one that most people are familiar with. You've got hybrids, you've got mitosis, and you've got Stencil. So when I was doing all of this research, I was looking at our use cases and kind of came to the conclusion that for our purposes, Stencil was the best thing to use at this point. So it was originally created for design systems and component libraries. That was a big tick for us, first of all. That's what we were trying to do. Ultimately, they've added support in to be able to build whole applications using Stencil. But actually, when it was initially put together, it had component libraries in mind. So that was good. That worked for us. It has TypeScript support as well. That was kind of an absolute must-have. If it was only JavaScript, we weren't going to be interested, but we needed TypeScript support. And it has output target libraries for different frameworks. So the React one is actually built off of the Lit React package, which I find quite interesting, that it's sort of using another one of these things to do essentially the same thing. But that does things like allow bindings for custom events, that kind of stuff that React really needs in order to be able to use web components properly. It also allows us to look at providing for other frameworks. So React was kind of the big question mark initially, but we have other teams that are using Angular. We have other teams that are using Vue. So we were thinking like longer term, like how do we get to a point where we can provide for these teams as well? And so having the ability to just plug in another output target library and say, okay, well now today we want Angular components too, that was pretty great. So we were thinking about future-proofing at this point. It's like, are we gonna acquire other products that have other frameworks that we don't currently provide for? How can we look at making sure that we can provide for them in the future? So this all kind of seemed great. So problem solved, right? Great. Move on. Well, not exactly. So moving on to the next challenge, I'd kind of put together all of this research, said, look, all of this stuff's great. We can make React components out of our web components. This is great. We can do all of these things. We can provide for different frameworks. Spot the difference. I'm kind of being a little bit mean here. This is kind of a trick question in a way. So the first button, my React developers, they really like that button. They're a big fan of that button. That's their favorite button. This button, oh, hello. Yeah, they're like, no, absolutely not. Not even going to have a conversation about this button. Not interested in the slightest. And the last one, well, the last one just kind of made him a little bit mad. There were a lot of strong opinions about that last button. And I didn't really anticipate this. I was thinking like, oh no, they'll be happy with this one. No, not so much. Okay, why? All right, the first button is just, that's kind of our legacy button. That was the one that was written in their component library, pure React. They built it. It's a button. Does what it should do. They like that one because it's React. The second one, that's a web component. They did not want to talk about the web component. They were like, absolutely not. That's not going in our application. Get it away from us. Not even going to have a discussion about it. But yeah, so that's, we built that one as a web component. And the last one, that's what we got when we ran our React output target, roughly. So it is basically the same thing. It's built with the same specifications as the first one. We've just put in a few things like default props, so it doesn't actually look like it's got as many props on there, but that's because we've done things like setting the primary variant as the default. But it is a trick because that's actually a screenshot of the exact same button, so there isn't really any difference. But yeah, it is the same button, really, kind of. But yeah, I don't know. It was getting to a point where we were like, okay, there's a problem here that we really aren't seeing because we're saying we can give you these React components, but you're not really happy with that, and you don't really think that that's actual React. So what's the issue here? What's the problem? So React devs, as it turns out, are really loyal to their framework. And I was a React developer. I'd come from that world. I'd kind of been in that place where it was like, well, yeah, this works fine. Why would I think about doing anything different? They just really didn't want change, and they really didn't want to have to think about things being done in a different way. They had kind of put all their components together themselves, and we were coming in and saying, well, okay, well, we're going to give you these things, and they'll look like React, but they won't really be React. And they were a bit like, no, this is not going to be good enough. And that was a really kind of unexpected hurdle in a way. Like, we kind of thought, well, if we can give you React components, then surely that answers the question. But actually, the human element in this was something a little bit unexpected for us within this research. They also had very specific wrapper requirements. There were things that they wanted that we were not getting just by running that output target. So they wanted to memorize all of their components. I'm not entirely sure why, but that's what they wanted to do. And we weren't getting that from the output target. They wanted to add refs on things, and we weren't getting that. And there were these specific things that they wanted from the components that we were going to provide them that we just weren't getting just by running that output target when we ran the build script. So there were some problems here. So it wasn't really necessarily providing everything that we needed. So, we were a little bit optimistic, thinking, okay, we can just put this together, run this thing, everyone's happy. Because, we didn't, straight out of the box, it was never really going to be exactly what they wanted when they, built their components to fit their requirements at the time. And we were just saying, oh, this thing should be good enough, right? I mean, obviously, it wasn't going to be that straightforward. So, was this a failed experiment? I mean, it would have, at this point, been really easy to kind of sack off the whole thing. We tried, we did the research. The team that we were predominantly working with at this point were just not convinced by it at all. And it felt really like they never would be. They were very much they were very specific in what they wanted. They were very specific in saying, no, we won't ever use this. So we found ourselves in an uncomfortable place. We could see the bigger picture. We could see the future benefits that it could provide by doing this. We could see new teams coming in with different frameworks we didn't currently provide for and being able to do that for them. We could kind of see all of the potential here. But we were kind of a little bit stuck. But we decided, let's make this work. We wanted to persevere. We had the bigger picture in mind. Yes, we had this kind of initial speed bump, I suppose, to get through with this one team. But we could see that it would be really beneficial going forward if we could get this right. So Stencil was doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but we kind of appreciated that at this point it wasn't really doing exactly what we wanted. And we needed to figure a way around that if we were actually going to make this work properly. So this is what we get when we run the React output target. So this is what Stencil gives us, basically. So there isn't things like the option to memorize stuff in there. There isn't kind of refs added to that. So this is what we got from Stencil. And we were deciding, okay, what can we do with this? And we realized, okay, we don't just have to accept what we get from this output target package. It's great. It's done a lot of the work for us. But, we can script some stuff to make it better. So we basically wrote a script that took those outputted React components and then wrote essentially a wrapper for the wrapper to put into the component what our developers required. So, we got the memoization in there. We got refs in there. We also did some nice sort of quality of life things in that if there were default props that had been defined within the web component specification, we could then pass them into the React component so that we got those when we had the React component as well, because it wasn't doing that on its own. So the other thing as well was that we didn't get the component types files. Stencil was really great at putting out one massive types file with all the components in it, but again, our developers rightly had their own requirements for how the structure of components worked. So they had individual directories for each one. They had a component types file specific to each component, and we couldn't get that from Stencil. So we just added it into the script. We took those things out of that massive components type file and put it in its own separate one. So we could get that, and then we got type safety, which at that point in time, I think Stencil have fixed this now. We weren't getting kind of IntelliSense and type safety with our React components just out of the box from what Stencil was giving us. So we kind of fixed that ourselves. if we needed to pass anything specific into the wrapper, if those developers came to us and said, we want this on every component, it's like, okay, well, fine, we can do that. We don't have to rewrite everything. We don't have to rewrite all of those components. We could just add it into our script. And if there were any substantial changes to React, we could kind of adapt to that as well. So when I first put this together, we were looking at React 17 because that was what one of our biggest product teams were using. But I was very keen to try and move us forward onto 18, and 19 is not really necessary because you kind of don't need wrappers at that point. But what I wanted to make sure was that if I changed our component output to React 18, that it would still work for those 17 components. And so any tweaks that we needed to those wrappers, we could just do within the script. We didn't need to rewrite everything. It wasn't like a massive project where we had to go through and overhaul everything. So yeah. We could fix it. We kind of found this to be a really good method. We didn't have to do all of that extra legwork. So what does this actually mean in practice? So this was about a year ago when I started doing all of the research. And since then, we've kind of moved a lot forward. Basically, we write our components once. We write them as web components. That's it. We don't have to worry about then rewriting them as a React component or rewriting them as an Angular component or any other kind of framework. We write them once as a web component, and then we run the Stencil output target for React, we run our post-build script, and then we get all of those things. That also kind of means that maintenance as well, any minor changes that we need to make, we only have to do those once in the web component, and then we just run the script again. So we don't have to keep making changes across the board. We can also look at providing for teams using other frameworks as well. So oh God, who's phoning me? It's very inconvenient timing for a suspected spam call. So we can provide for teams using other frameworks as well. We have a number of different teams who use Angular, quite a few different of our acquired products as well. And they've come to us and they've said, we would really love to use your coded components, but we know you don't have an Angular package, so I guess we'll just use your styles. And we're like, oh, no, wait, we don't have that now, but we can do that for you. We can have those conversations. We can start to work with those teams as well. Particularly as a team of 3 UI engineers, none of us are actually experts in Angular, so we don't have that syntax knowledge. If we were just having to provide these things with just the 3 of us not knowing that framework, it would be impossible. It would be an insurmountable task. But we don't actually need to do that because we can at least get part of the way there by just writing the web components and then outputting them into Angular. So our component packages are always in sync as well, which is a really big deal. It's really hard within a design system to make sure that you've got that consistency. If you make changes in one package and then you've got to wait until you can update them in another, and then changes are made somewhere else, everything is constantly out of sync in some way. We don't really have to worry about that because we're only making those changes in one place and then propagating them out to everything else. So we're not having that issue of one package being behind another, one team getting new components before another team, components with bugs getting fixed in one area and not in the other. We've always got everything in sync, which is really, really great for us, again, particularly as 3 people. It's not kind of all plain sailing, though. There are still some shortcomings to this. We do still have to write tests and stories in each package. We want to make sure that what we're putting out to our product teams is well tested, is of good quality. And so as a result of that, we're writing tests for the web components and we're writing tests for the React components as well. And when we've got Angular, we'll have to do that too. So we do still have that duplication of effort when it comes to things like testing and writing stories for Storybook. We have storybooks for both React and for web components currently, although the web components one is a little bit broken because Stencil broke something. But I'm told they fixed it and I'll put that upgrade in soon. But either way, we still want to provide all of these things in the different versions that we have available, which means that we still have to write them manually ourselves. We're using Claude and things to kind of make those things a bit easier, but Claude does go rogue and decide to rewrite a story in a completely off-base way sometimes, but yes, AI, what can you do? Components sometimes misbehave as well. We've had a few times where someone will have written a component that works perfectly as a web component, works great in our code sandbox, and then you put it into the React one, and for some reason it is not doing what it should be doing. I had a lot of issues with my radio button group to the point where I thought I was going a little bit insane trying to get the damn thing to work in React when it was working perfectly fine as a web component. So there is occasionally that mismatch where something isn't working quite as you expected in one of the different packages. And Stencil sometimes misbehaves as well. This is a dependency that we have on an external library. As I said, the current storybook that we have for web components isn't live and working because something is broken within the Stencil package. So we are kind of reliant on that in some ways. So it's not always ideal to be in a situation where something could break on an upgrade and then you just have to either roll it back or deal with it. Also, it makes contribution a little tricky as well. So one of the big things that we talked about when we were starting the design system, particularly on the coded side, was how do we get developers from our product teams to contribute back into the design system? And when we kind of remove the need to write those framework components, it makes it harder for them to do that, because what you're asking them to do is not write something in the framework that they know, that they do on a regular basis, but you're asking them to essentially learn new syntax. And that's kind of a big ask. Contribution is a big ask anyway. It requires a lot of goodwill. So if you're then saying, okay, yeah, we really want your help, we really want you to get involved and contribute, but you're going to have to learn this whole new thing that you didn't sign up for. That's kind of a lot. And we haven't really found a good answer to that question yet. So it's something that we'll need to look at in future, because we don't want to kind of prevent other developers from getting involved. We don't want to gatekeep this. So it's something that we still need to figure out. But ultimately, we are a team of only 3 UI engineers, and we're trying to provide for a lot of different product teams. And if we had to write and maintain components in all of the frameworks that we want and need to provide for, it just wouldn't be possible. We wouldn't be able to do that. So this has made it kind of a lot more feasible in what is a very constrained set of resources. So where are we at now? Well, we have a web components package and we have a React package. And the React package does everything that that one product team wanted it to do. It has everything in the wrappers that they required, and that's great. We didn't really see us getting to that point when we first started and we were having those initial conversations. We're adding support in for SSR as well, so we can do that as part of our React package. We've got a team who are using Next.js for something new. They really want to use our components, but they need SSR support, so we're looking at adding that in, and it should be in maybe next week if I get back to work quick. We're also, as I said, working with teams to add Angular. So they came to us with conversations about it. We don't have a familiarity in Angular, but what we can do is put the components out there in a really kind of rough and ready way and go and have those conversations with those developers and say, is this what you want? What can we change? What do we need to alter? Is this going to work for you? So we are in a really good place to be able to do that. And teams are adopting our components regularly as well. There was a point where we were writing a lot of components, and it really felt like no one was ever going to use them. It was a little bit like screaming into the void in a lot of ways. It's like, oh, we're doing all of this great stuff, why won't you use it? And it did kind of feel a little bit like we were going to do all of this, and no one would ever be interested in picking it up. But recently, we've had a lot of times where we've just put out a package update, and we'll have teams who are using those new components within the week that we put out the update, which is really big. And considering we've only really been working on this properly for just over a year, I don't think we saw it happening this quickly. So that's kind of a really big deal. And a lot of that has been possible because we haven't had to worry about, again, providing those different frameworks manually, writing all of those things and keeping them in sync with everything else. So that's kind of really big for us. So can you keep everyone happy? Well, no, obviously not. That's kind of a big ask, and a web component is going to make everybody happy. No, probably not. Can you convince React superfans that the components that we give them are going to be good enough? Well, potentially. We did sort of change opinions in some ways, and we have seen some movement. We do still have issues with that one team who very much wanted to do things their own way, and they are our most successful product. So obviously they're going to be kind of wedded to the way that they've always done stuff. It's going to be really hard to get around that kind of mentality, but we've seen some inroads into it. So that's progress. And we have other teams that are happy to pick up the things that we've put out, and they aren't having those kind of big existential crises of, oh, if it's not actual React, then is it actual React? I don't know. So yeah, it very much depends on which developers you're talking to. But can we at least start to provide resources to our teams without forcing them to wait for us to rewrite everything in a completely different framework? Well, yes, we can do that. That's a really big deal. You know, we can provide for our Angular teams within the very foreseeable future. It's not going to take a long time to rewrite everything. They're not going to have to rewrite their entire platform in React because one team has decided that we will only provide React and nothing else, which would be completely unreasonable to expect a team to do that. So can we help them do the things that they need to do? Yes. So spot the difference. You already know now. You know it's a trick. Ultimately, it's not about Stencil, and it's not even about web components. It's about being able to provide for our teams in a way that makes their jobs easier and ultimately provide a better experience for our users. We're trying to provide things that all of our teams can use, and therefore all of our users will benefit from, which is kind of the point. So web components aren't the thing. They're the thing that gets us to the thing. And it might be uncomfortable at times, but we're making it work. So that kind of seems like a win to me. I don't know.